The man at the head of the table had 3 lawyers, 2 federal consultants, and a reputation for never losing a negotiation. He was losing this one. Lena Cutler could see it from the supply closet doorway, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers had stopped moving on the table, the particular stillness of a man who had run out of options but hadn't admitted it yet. She recognized that stillness. She'd spent years watching people perform confidence they didn't feel. She should have left 10 minutes ago. The cleaning cart was still in the hallway outside Conference Room B, mop handle tilted against the wall at the angle she always left it when she ducked inside to restock the shelves. She was supposed to be finished with this floor by 7. It was now 7:42, and the meeting that was supposed to end at 6:30 had not ended. It had escalated. And Lena, who had made the reasonable decision to wait it out in the supply closet rather than roll her cart through an active negotiation, had spent the last hour standing very still between the shelf of hand towels and the shelf of cleaning concentrate, listening to a deal fall apart in 3 languages. The conference room belonged to Harwick Capital. The man at the head of the table was Callum Harwick. Not the founder, that was his father, who was dead, but the current CEO, 41, Stanford MBA, known in financial circles for being the kind of man who made other men nervous without raising his voice. She knew who he was because his face was on the wall downstairs, in the lobby, in a framed photograph next to his father's. She walked past it every night. Across the table from him sat a delegation of 4 men from a German investment group called Brandt Meridian. She knew this because one of them had said it, very precisely, when the meeting began. She had not known at that point that she would still be here an hour later. She had thought she'd wait 5 minutes. The German on the far left was the one doing most of the talking now. His name was Heinrich Brauer. She'd gathered that from context, and he was speaking in English that was technically fluent and deliberately misleading. Not because his English was imperfect, because he was choosing words that meant different things depending on whether you understood the particular legal framework he was referencing, which was not American, and which Harwick's lawyers clearly did not. The lawyer on Harwick's left had been nodding for 30 minutes. He had no idea what he was agreeing to. Lena pressed her back against the shelf and told herself it was not her problem. Her name was Lena Cutler. She was 29 years old. She had a cleaning job that paid $14 an hour and a studio apartment in Queens with a radiator that clanged all winter. She had a library card she used aggressively, a subscription to 3 academic journals she'd found a way to access for free, and a brain that had never once in her life taken her anywhere that mattered. She was, by every visible measure, a woman who cleaned offices at night and went home in the morning and did not involve herself in the affairs of men who had their photographs in lobbies. She was also fluent in German and French and Mandarin, Cantonese, Italian, Portuguese, and enough Russian to follow a conversation if it wasn't too fast. She did not advertise this. There was no context in her current life in which it came up. Her mother had been a translator at the UN for 20 years. Lena had grown up in the margins of 7 languages, the way other children grew up with background television, absorbing it without trying, understanding it before she understood that understanding it was unusual. She'd gotten a full scholarship to study linguistics at Columbia. She had finished with honors into a job market that had no particular interest in her, followed by 2 years of applications that went nowhere, followed by the quiet slide into work that paid weekly and didn't require references from people who no longer returned her emails. She was not bitter about this. She had decided, some time ago, not to be bitter about it. But she stood in that supply closet and listened to Heinrich Brauer tell Callum Harwick's lawyer, in English that sounded cooperative and German that did not, that the arbitration clause they were about to agree to would legally require any future dispute to be resolved under German commercial law in a Frankfurt court. And she felt something shift in her chest that she did not immediately have a name for. The lawyer nodded again. "That's consistent with standard international arbitration," he said. It was not. Not the way Brauer had written it. Lena looked at the hand towels. She looked at the cleaning concentrate. She thought about her cart in the hallway and the 3 more floors she had to do before midnight, and the fact that none of this was her problem, and she was, technically, not even supposed to be in this room. Then Brower said something in German to the man beside him, quiet, fast, not meant to be heard clearly across the table. And what he said was, "Let him sign it. He doesn't know what the penalty clause actually triggers." The man beside him smiled. Harwick was looking at the contract. His pen was in his hand. Lena opened the supply closet door. She didn't think about it very much, which was perhaps the only reason she did it. Thinking about it would have stopped her. She crossed the 12 feet of conference room carpet between the closet door and the table in the time it took Harwick's lawyer to say, "Mr. Harwick, I think we're ready to. Stop." She said it quietly. She said it in the same tone she used when she told people there was wet floor ahead, informative, not dramatic, not asking for anything. Every head in the room turned. She was wearing her uniform. It was dark blue, with the building services logo on the left chest, and it did not fit her especially well because building services issued uniforms in 3 sizes, and she was between 2 of them. She was holding nothing. She had left the cart in the hall. Callum Harwick looked at her the way people looked at things that didn't compute. Not angry yet, just buffering. "I'm sorry," he said. "Who are you?" "Lena Cutler. I clean this floor." She kept her voice even. "I've been in the supply closet for the last hour. I wasn't trying to listen, but the acoustics in that room are, it doesn't matter." She looked at the contract in front of him. "Don't sign that." One of his lawyers stood up. "This is completely inappropriate. The arbitration clause," Lena said, still looking at Harwick. "Your attorney thinks it specifies standard international arbitration. It doesn't. The way it's written, any dispute triggers resolution under German commercial law, Section 1043 of the ZPO in Frankfurt. Mr. Brower used English for the first part of that clause and German legal terminology for the second. If you don't know both frameworks, it reads as routine. It isn't." Silence. Brower's expression had not changed, but his eyes had. She had seen that change in eyes before. The moment someone realizes the person they dismissed is not in fact dismissible. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," he said in English pleasantly. "I'm fluent in German," Lena said. "I also heard what you said to your colleague 2 minutes ago." She said the next part in German precisely and watched Brower's pleasant expression stop working. Harwick had put his pen down. He was looking at her differently now. Not the buffering look, something sharper and more attentive. She had his full attention in a way that was slightly alarming, like standing in a beam of light that had been aimed somewhere else and suddenly wasn't. "What else?" he said. "That's the main one." She paused. "There's also a provision in the French summary document, the one your team was given as a translation aid, that omits the exit terms that appear in the original German draft. If you signed based on the summary, you'd have agreed to a lock-in period twice what your team thinks it is." One of the German delegation was already reaching for his phone. Harwick reached out and put his hand flat on the contract before anyone could move it. It was a quiet gesture, and it stopped the room. "Mr. Brower," he said, without looking at the man, "I think we'll take a recess." He said it the way he said everything, without raising his voice, without drama, but the temperature in the room had changed, and everyone felt it. The Germans filed out. One of Harwick's lawyers followed them, already talking quickly into his own phone. The room cleared in under 2 minutes, and then it was just Harwick and his remaining attorney and Lena, standing in her uniform next to the head of the table. The attorney looked like he wanted to say something. Harwick gave him a small look and he didn't. "Give us a moment," Harwick said. The attorney left. Harwick looked at Lena. She looked back. She realized, not particularly frightened, which was interesting, because she had just interrupted a 9-figure negotiation to tell a billionaire that his lawyers were about to be outmaneuvered, and by any rational assessment, the next few minutes could go badly. "You said you cleaned this floor," he said. "Yes. How long have you worked in this building?" 14 months. He picked up the contract. Set it down again. How many languages? 8. She thought about qualifying that, well, some better than others, and then didn't. She spoke 8 languages. That was true. Something moved across his face that she couldn't read. And you have a degree in linguistics. Columbia, 2019. He was quiet for a moment. And you're cleaning offices at night. It wasn't quite a question, so she didn't answer it. She'd learned a long time ago not to explain herself to people who were really asking her to feel bad about something. I should get back to work, she said. I have 3 more floors. Sit down, he said. Not a request, but not unkind either. She sat down in the chair across from where the German delegation had been, and he sat in his, and for the next 45 minutes, Callum Harwick did something she had not expected. He asked her real questions and listened to the answers. Not the performative listening of someone deciding what to say next, actually listening. The kind that has a quality of weight to it, that makes you feel the particular alertness of being taken seriously by someone who takes very little seriously. He wanted to know what she had heard. She told him precisely, including the exact phrasing Brouwer had used, and what it meant within the German legal framework. He asked her to explain the ZPO reference in more detail. She did. He asked 2 follow-up questions that told her he was not a man who pretended to understand things he didn't, which was, in her experience, rarer than it should have been. At some point, one of his attorneys came back in and started to interrupt, and Harwick said, "Not yet, Marcus," and the attorney left again. "You knew all of this," Harwick said when she had finished. "You were in that closet for an hour and you just waited." "I was going to leave," she said, "and then I wasn't. Why?" She thought about this. "Because your lawyer was nodding," she said, "and he didn't know what he was agreeing to. That's my problem, not yours." "I know." She looked at her hands. "I couldn't leave anyway." He was quiet for a moment. "I want you to come back tomorrow," he said. "Not to clean the floor." She looked up. "I have a second meeting with Brouwer's group. A follow-up, and apparently I need someone in the room who can tell me what's actually being said." "You have attorneys," she said. "I have attorneys who nearly cost me $40 million tonight because they couldn't tell a German arbitration clause from a standard one." His voice was level. "I'd like someone else in the room. I'm a night shift cleaner. I'm aware." She thought about her cart in the hallway. She thought about the 3 floors she still had to finish. She thought about the fact that her shift ended at midnight and started again at 10 p.m. tomorrow, which meant there was a window, and that she was already making a list of the terminology she'd want to brush up on before walking into a room with Heinrich Brouwer again. "What time?" she said. She went back the next afternoon in her own clothes, which were decent if not remarkable. Dark trousers, a grey top, the blazer she'd bought 2 years ago for an interview that had gone nowhere. She carried a notepad. She did not know quite what she was walking into, but she had spent the morning reviewing German commercial arbitration law and the afternoon memorizing the specific provisions of the contract. Harwick had photographed and sent to her phone, which was the most startling part of the previous night, that he had simply taken out his phone, photographed the contract, and texted it to her as though the action required no deliberation. The receptionist on the 32nd floor looked at her with polite uncertainty. Lena gave her name. The uncertainty cleared immediately, which meant Harwick had told them she was coming, which meant he had actually meant it, which she had been approximately 60% sure about. His assistant, a focused woman named Andrea, walked her to a smaller conference room off the main corridor and left her with coffee and a printed summary of the day's agenda, which was thoughtful. Harwick arrived 7 minutes before the meeting. He was in a suit that had clearly been made for him, which Lena noticed only because it was the kind of thing that was obvious when you grew up around diplomats and negotiators, people for whom clothing was a form of communication. He looked at her across the room for a moment with the same quality of attention she had experienced the night before. "You read the contract," he said. "I have questions about Section 4, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Tell me on the way in." she told him on the way in, and he listened and asked one follow-up question, and they were still discussing it when the German delegation arrived, which meant that Brower walked into the room to find Harwick mid-sentence, relaxed and focused, and Lena at his elbow. Brower saw her and stopped. The pause was small, the kind of pause that only existed in the half-second before someone rearranged their face into something neutral. She had catalogued that pause and filed it away before he'd finished rearranging. He said in German to the man beside him, "She's here again." The man beside him said, "Does he know what she is?" Brower said, "It doesn't matter, we adjust." Lena kept her expression politely interested and said nothing. The meeting went for 3 hours. It was the most engaged Lena had been in a professional setting since the last time she'd been in a professional setting that mattered, which was long enough ago that the precise memory of it had blurred. She caught 3 instances of deliberate mistranslation in documents provided as supporting materials. She caught one where Brower's colleague switched into French, apparently believing no one at the table would follow, to confirm a strategy with Brower that directly contradicted what Brower had just said in English. She wrote the key phrase in her notepad in English and slid it across the table to Harwick without comment. He read it. He looked up at Brower. He said, "I'd like to revisit the exit terms." Brower said, "I think we've been quite clear on those." Harwick said, "I'd like to revisit them anyway." What followed was 35 minutes of the most careful negotiation Lena had ever watched in person, conducted almost entirely through implication and counter-implication, with Harwick using the information she fed him to ask questions that he already knew the answers to, which was a technique she recognized from watching her mother work and had never expected to see deployed in quite this way. At 2 points, Brower switched languages mid-sentence, once to German, once to French, and both times Lena quietly relayed the full meaning to Harwick, and both times Harwick incorporated it without reaction, without acknowledgement, without giving Brower any indication of how the information had reached him. By the end of the 3rd hour, Brower had agreed to terms that were, by any measure, significantly less favorable to his group than the ones he had arrived intending to secure. He knew it, the man beside him knew it, everyone in the room knew it. Brower looked at Lena once on his way out. She looked back. He said, in German very quietly, "You are not what you appear to be." She said in German with equal quiet, "Neither were your documents." He left. The room emptied, and then it was Harwick and Lena for the second time in a cleared conference room. This had apparently become a pattern which she was not sure what to do with. "Section 4, he said. "You held back on it." "Yes." "Smart," she said. "If you'd pushed it today, he would have walked. You'll get more traction when his group has fewer alternatives." He looked at her steadily. "How do you know his group's timeline?" "Something his colleague said in German in the first meeting," she said. "They're presenting to their board in 6 weeks. They need this deal completed before that." Harwick was quiet for a long moment. "I'd like to offer you a position," he said. She had been expecting some version of this, but not quite so directly, and she felt something in her chest do an uncertain thing in response. "What kind of position?" she said. "Director of Strategic Intelligence," he said. "It's a new role. It would involve this, being present in high-stakes negotiations, monitoring communication across languages, advising on what's actually being said versus what's being presented." He paused. "And other things. The scope is broad. I don't have a corporate background. I know. I've been cleaning offices for 14 months. I know that too." She looked at the table. Outside the windows, the city was doing its usual thing, indifferent, enormous, lit up in ways that always looked more organized from above than they felt from inside. "Why?" she said. It was a real question. She meant, why me? Why now? Why are you offering a directorship to a woman you met in a supply closet 40 hours ago? He understood what she was asking. She could see that he did. "Because in 3 hours," he said, "you caught every attempt they made. You anticipated 2 moves before they made them. You gave me information that shifted this negotiation by at least $20 million in my favor, and you did it quietly, without making it about yourself, without once suggesting that my attorneys were incompetent even though they were. He paused. And because you speak 8 languages, he said, and you're cleaning floors at night, and I think someone should have given you this conversation 6 years ago, and didn't, and I'd rather be the one who does it now than miss it. Lena was quiet for a moment. She thought about the supply closet. She thought about the hand towels and the cleaning concentrate, and the way the acoustics had carried Brouwer's German across the room and into her chest like something aimed. She thought about her mother at the UN, working in the margins of other people's important conversations, and how she'd always said that translation was the most invisible power in any room, that the person who understood every language held every hand of cards. "I'll need a week," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "I can't just leave," she said. "The building services team is short-staffed. I need to give them time to cover my floors." Something happened on his face that she hadn't seen there before. It was not a business expression. It was something quieter and less controlled than anything she'd observed from him across a negotiation table. "A week," he said, "and I'll want the contract reviewed by my own attorney before I sign anything, obviously. And I'll need you to tell me what Section 4 is really about. Not the summary version." He looked at her for a long moment. "Have dinner with me," he said. "I'll tell you." She picked up her notepad. "That's not how this works," she said. "Tell me now, and I'll consider the dinner." He was quiet, then he said fair, and he told her. 3 weeks later, Lena Cutler had a desk on the 32nd floor, a business card that said Director of Strategic Intelligence in clean, dark letters, and a blazer she had bought with the first advance on her new salary, which fit her considerably better than the building services uniform had. She had also, in those 3 weeks, quietly identified 2 additional vulnerabilities in the Brant Meridian contract that Harwick's attorneys had missed, flagged a discrepancy in a separate acquisition document that had saved the company from a liability it hadn't known it was walking toward, and translated a spontaneous conversation between 2 visiting Hong Kong investors that had given Harwick's team a week's advance notice on a competitive move. Word had traveled, in the particular way that word traveled in closed financial circles. She was not sure what the word was exactly, but she had noticed that people in the elevator looked at her differently than they had when she was rolling a cart through it. She was in her office, an actual office with windows, something she had not had in several years, when Harwick appeared in the doorway in the late afternoon. He did this occasionally. He was, she had discovered, a man who thought better while walking, and thinking while walking sometimes brought him to her doorway, and she had begun to find this unremarkable in a way that probably warranted examination. "The Munich group pushed their meeting to Thursday," he said. "I know. Andrea told me." She didn't look up from the document she was reading. "I've been reviewing their public filings. There's a pattern in how their CFO structures deferment language. I want to be ready for it." A pause. "You've been here 3 weeks," he said. "Yes. You're already anticipating their CFO's linguistic patterns." She looked up. "Is that a problem?" He was looking at her with the same quality of attention she had first felt in the supply closet, the full beam of it, aimed precisely. But there was something else in it now that had been accumulating, she thought. Over 3 weeks of doorway conversations and negotiation rooms and late afternoons when the floor got quiet, and they both happened to still be there. "No," he said. "It's not a problem." She held his gaze for a moment. "You should have gone home an hour ago," she said. "So should you." Outside the windows, the city was beginning to shift into its evening configuration, lights coming on in the towers across the street. She thought about the subway ride that waited for her, and the studio apartment in Queens, and the radiator that still clanged. She hadn't gotten around to moving yet. There had been too much to learn, too many documents to read, too many mornings when she'd looked up from a contract and realized it was noon. "There's a place on 43rd, Harwick said, "that has the best duck confit in the city, and I've been trying to find someone worth talking to over dinner for longer than I care to admit." She considered this. Section 4, she said. He smiled. The full one, not the controlled version. The one that looked like it surprised him slightly every time it happened. We went over Section 4. I have more questions. I know you do. He straightened from the doorway. That's why I'm asking. She closed the document. She picked up her blazer from the back of her chair, the one that fit. You're buying, she said. Obviously, he said. And she followed him out of her office, past the reception desk, into the elevator that she had once ridden every night with a cleaning cart, and did not for one moment feel like a woman who had ended up somewhere by accident. She felt for the first time in a very long time like a woman who had been here all along, waiting for the room to be paying attention.